Welcome to this video on the top 10 werewolves of the Shadow Lord's tribe from the tabletop role-playing game Werewolf the Apocalypse. The Shadow Lords are a tribe of contradictions. They hold dominance and hierarchy as absolute principles, but also cultivate ambition and cunning amongst its members. Long ago, the Shadow Lords realized that power and title are two different things. The Shadow Lords do not seek power for their own sake, at least, not in general. But they seek power for Gaia's sake, and for the good of the Garou nation. They will humble themselves, follow leaders inferior to themselves, scheme, lie, blackmail, betray, and assassinate enemies and allies alike without hesitation. But without further ado, the top 10 werewolves of the Shadow Lords. Number 10. Thunder's Roar. The life of a Metis Garou is rarely easy. Thunder's Roar was the product of such an illegal coupling in the 12th century in Europe. His birth was accompanied by the death of his mother, who perished thanks to his monstrous size. Other than that, he showed no signs of a Metis deformity. He was apparently perfectly normal, albeit a huge child who in time became a huge adult. Also, he had an unnatural calmness to his personality. This was not due to a lack of emotion, but rather an inborn self-discipline that gave him control over his feelings and even his rage as a Garou. However, he had these fits of madness. Well, to call them madness would be inaccurate. Thunder's Roar decided when to unleash his rage, and when he did, he could not stop until it was spent. Once he focused his obsession on a single target, he would not stop until that person, or creature, was destroyed. Thunder's Roar saved his Sept from attack more than once, but he was greatly feared. When he was older, Thunder's Roar learned the truth of his mother's death, of the litany, and the blasphemy that was his own existence. He decided that he needed to atone for the sin of his own life, and perhaps lift the burden of guilt over causing his own mother's death. By his birth, he was a violation of the litany. With his life, he would become the embodiment of the litany, and the judge, jury, and executioner of all who broke it through their selfishness and carelessness, as his parents had. And so, the litany became the obsession of Thunder's Roar. Little by little, he persuaded the elders of his Sept to teach the litany to him. They assumed it was because of his philodox nature, and over time, they indulged him. He also learned the art of smithing, and used those skills to forge a great silver axe for himself. It was a painful process, especially for a Metis, but his obsession was greater than his suffering, and when he completed it, he turned the blade against his enemies, Garou and vampire alike. When he had learned all that he could from his elders, he turned his silver axe against them. Now Garou are fearsome warriors, but even among them there are differences. And a 12-foot-tall, 1-ton Garou, armed with a silver great axe, is like loosing a tiger on newborn kittens. As he cut through the Sept, Thunder's Roar quoted the litany to his victims, and the transgressions that had brought their doom upon them. The survivors of his righteous rampage were left in trembling fear of him, but his obsession was at last fulfilled. The Sept had been cleansed of evil. Then, Thunder's Roar took to the road, to pass judgment on the other Septs of Europe. Thunder's Roar was the first of the Shadow Lord's camp, known in the final days as the Judges of Doom. Even when gripped by his particular obsession with the litany, he always scrupulously observed its tenets. He maintained the veil at all times, and never harmed another Garou who had not demonstrably broken the litany. It was Thunder's Roar's zealotry that won him devoted followers, all philodoxes, who would take up the axe and the path of judgment long after Thunder's Roar died. Number 9. Sonja. The 15th century was a time of great chaos in Hungary and Romania. The warder of the Sept of the Night Sky, Celestina Gregoris, also known as Celestina the Brave, was attacked and raped by another Garou who had been driven mad by war. This was but one of the many acts the insane werewolf committed before he was destroyed. But several months later, one of his crime's consequences came into the world, a Metis cub, born to Celestina, who she gave the name Sonja. At first glance, the child bore no sign of typical Metis deformity. In fact, the baby Sonja was quite beautiful, but the child's presence had an unsettling effect on those who stayed around her too long. The Sept voted to destroy the child, but Celestina would not allow them to kill her daughter, and vowed to tear apart anyone who tried. But Sonja's childhood was a miserable one. She was feared, mistrusted, and even her mother, despite her best efforts, was uncomfortable in the presence of her own daughter. This caused Sonja to retreat within herself and become cold and severe. When she was old enough to fight, she threw herself into battle against the vampires of Hungary and Romania, fending off half a dozen raids before the elders of the Sept accepted that Sonja, now named the Iron Maiden, was too valuable a resource to cast aside. With time, Sonja proved to not only be a deadly warrior, but a competent leader. Her black eyes, silver hair, icy demeanor, and aura of dread terrorized her enemies and dominated her Septmates into obedience. Eventually, Sonja succeeded her mother as warder of the Sept of the night sky. She further demonstrated her worth by creating the talent known as Leech's Blood, a fetish that makes the drinker's blood toxic to any vampire foolish enough to try and drink from a Shadow Lord's kin. Vampires had proven crucial to Sonja's rise, but they would also prove to be her doom. One night, Sonja, the Iron Maiden, fell in battle against one of the Leech's blood mages, torn apart by his unholy power, but not before she bested some of the strongest warriors the Leeches had to offer. Sonja's name is still honored in the Sept of the night sky, and is offered as an example of what a determined Metis can achieve, despite the circumstances of her birth. Number 8. Blackfang. Blackfang was a lupus Garou born in Voivode, Auvergne, France, in 1762. His wolf pack was constantly at odds with humanity, as the wolves tended to prey on livestock. This led to the humans turning on the wolves to hunt them. But when Blackfang underwent the first change and became a Shadow Lord, the hunters soon became the hunted. Eventually, in violation of the litany, Blackfang considered humans to be little more than prey. In fact, he regarded them as vermin to be eradicated from the face of Gaia for the sin of trying to exterminate wolves. So Blackfang's crusade began in Voivode with the massacre of a dozen humans. But the Garou did not work alone. He was accompanied by two of his kin, great black wolves who did not fear humans and were as hateful as Blackfang. After 2 months, they moved their base of operations to Gévaudan. As Blackfang's body count climbed, the Shadow Lords were duty-bound to hunt down this rogue Garou, as his thoughtless actions not only threatened the reputation of the tribe, but the sanctity of the Vale and the safety of the Garou's wolf kin. However, Blackfang had his own supporters. Certain of the Shadow Lords and the Red Talons aided Blackfang and covered his tracks, because they approved of his one Garou impergium. Nevertheless, the Vale held firm, and the humans of France blamed the attacks on a great wolf they named La Bête du Gévaudan, the Beast. After several failed attempts to hunt down the beast, King Louis XV dispatched his royal gun-bearer and lieutenant of the hunt, François-Antoine Marquis Argent, to slay the beast once and for all. On September 21st, 1765, François killed one of Blackfang's wolf kin near Chaz. Because of the size and ferocity of the wolf, he believed that he had slain the beast itself, and all of France rejoiced. But Blackfang himself remained at large and continued to kill, albeit with less frequency. Finally, on June 18, 1767, a farmer named Jean Chastel, who was also a Shadow Lord's kinfolk, shot Blackfang in the heart with a silver bullet. A week later, Blackfang's mate was hunted down, thus ending the reign of the Beast of Gévaudan once and for all. But in Blackfang's 3-year reign of terror, he slew 113 humans, making him one of the worst serial killers in the history of the Garou nation. Number 7. Boris Thunderstrike. Boris was born in the latter half of the 19th century in the Thunderstrike Sept of Russia. He was a descendant of shadow lords who were emissaries from Wallachia to Tsarina Yekaterina Alexeyevna Romanova, better known to history as Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia. The Thunderstrikes remained in Russia and continuously threatened the power of the great house of the Silverfangs tribe. Boris, by virtue of birth, would have eventually gained a high rank in the Thunderstrike Sept, but he was not content to merely wait for ranks and titles to pass to him. He wanted to test his mettle, to prove himself worthy to Grandfather Thunder, patron spirit of the tribe. He returned to the homeland, Wallachia, and the Sept of the Night Sky. The Cairned Sept historically belonged to the Shadow Lords, but the Silverfangs managed to seize it when the Shadow Lords were at a low ebb during one of their fights against their hated enemies, the Tzimisce vampires. The leader of the Sept was a Silverfang named Heart of Fury, a braggart who was known to show hospitality to traveling Garou, if only to have a fresh ear to pour his ego and boast into about how the Silverfangs stabilized the region, though he neglected to mention that the vampires still stalked the night as freely as they had centuries before. But Boris recognized that Heart of Fury was a powerful warrior and knew he could not challenge the Silverfang directly. Instead, he humbled himself and petitioned Heart of Fury to serve as his beta. Boris Thunderstrike was a capable Garou, but Heart of Fury suspected his treachery and believed he was clever enough to expose and humiliate the young Shadow Lord for his plotting. Boris arranged for a Shadow Moot, one of the largest in Shadow Lord's history, that spanned across 4 countries. As Heart of Fury's egomania and paranoia grew, more Garou were recruited into the Shadow Moot, until the Sept of the Night Sky became the heart of an elaborate campaign to force the Silverfang leader out of power. By the end of the 19th century, Heart of Fury was forced to abdicate his position as Sept leader, and the Sept of the Night Sky not only returned to Shadow Lord's control, but became the nexus for Shadow Lord's plotting throughout Europe for the better part of the 20th century. Number 6. Alexandru ThunderRage. Alexandru Parvin was one of the most powerful warlords the Shadow Lord's tribe ever produced. By treachery, assassination, subterfuge, and battle, he united 5 septs beneath his iron rule. To maintain his power, he turned his would-be successors against one another. In mockery of the Silverfangs he despised, he took the title of king and the name ThunderRage. But power tends to attract attention, and in Alexandru ThunderRage's desire to conquer the Transylvanian Alps, he would come into conflict with one Miguel Dombrescu, a voivode of Clan Tzimisce. Dombrescu marshaled his forces north of Alexandru, and then proposed an alliance with the Shadow Lord King, offering peace with one hand and threatening war with the other. But ThunderRage knew that if he accepted this alliance, even temporarily, it would split his followers and tear his lands apart, which was likely what the fiend intended in the first place. Alexandru went through the motions of bargaining with the Leech, all while he prepared for war. Alexandru then met with the emissaries of Dombrescu in the hills of Carpathia. While they were distracted, 2 of Alexandru's betas led 3 war packs to surround the meeting, and then slaughtered Dombrescu's emissaries and their attendants. Only one was left alive to carry the ashes of the fallen back to the Voivode. The war between King Alexandru ThunderRage and Voivode Mikhail Dombrescu was fought in the shadow of the war between the Russians and the Ottoman Turks. As the war dragged on, Alexandru's frenzies grew more violent, and he saw conspiracies everywhere. Dissent warped into treason in his mind, and those who criticized the Shadow Lord King too loudly were never seen again. Eventually, Alexandru, in one of his frenzies, ripped out the throat of Mihaly, his beta and one-time leader of the Sept of the Brooding Sky. Alexandru's high priest, and the only Garou he called a friend, Old Pasik, bid him enter the Umbra to confront the dull, raging beast in his heart. If he did not, then the other Garou would inevitably usurp him and tear him to pieces. Alexandru ThunderRage walked the moon paths into the Umbra, walked until he reached a place known to travelers as Baharian, a rain-drenched city, crowded by the dead, where pyres burned in the streets and smoke lingered just above the tallest buildings. He passed among the throngs of the living and the dead, chanting, threatening, singing dirges and nonsensical rhymes. All the while a voice whispered in his mind, "You must not stay." Another warned that his foe was watching him, waiting, just out of reach. A death stalked him, wearing Alexandru's own face. Then, Alexandru suddenly warred against his own doppelganger, a Garou just as powerful and as savage as himself, and for the first time in his life, he was afraid. The doppelganger left Alexandru, wounded but still alive, and retreated back into the shadowy streets. Alexandru wandered, wounded and disheartened. He stumbled through the spiral city until he reached its center, where a statue of a noble wolf stood, gazing towards the North Star, surrounded by weeds and rubble and the remnants of things that might have been. Alexandru thought he saw words inscribed on the pedestal of the statue, "The hero who overcomes." Tears filled his eyes. Looking on this wolf, Alexandru realized how shamefully he had lived. Even in this place of decay and ruined dreams and death, here stood the wolf, the Garou, the hero who overcomes. In that moment, his heart was changed from mindless killer to warrior. Filled with new purpose and savage joy not to kill, but to live, he stopped running from his doppelganger and became the hunter. Once more, in the shadow of a ruined cathedral, the doppelganger and Alexandru fought, but this time, Alexandru was the victor. A new path opened for him out of Baharian, the road of heroes. No longer was Alexandru ThunderRage a violent beast craving domination, but a true ruler of cold command and cruel contemplation. Alexandru ThunderRage re-emerged from the Umbra as a new Garou, now tempered by wisdom. He gave his betas leave to fight their own battles against Miguel Dombrescu, and rewarded those who fought well. The Voivode's power over the Carpathians was broken for a time by the united Shadow Lords. When Russia descended into revolution against its Tsar during World War I, Alexandru led the Shadow Lords there to challenge the Silverfangs in their own lands. Then, Alexandru ThunderRage gave up his hard-won title of king and walked into the Umbra once more, never to return. Theurges of the Shadow Lord's tribe claim that Alexandru went to build another kingdom within the legendary realm, and will return for the final battle of the apocalypse. Number 5. Whispers in Darkness. Whispers in Darkness was an unknown lupus until several years ago, when he walked right into a Black Fury Sept and informed them, in explicit detail, about the structure, security, and strength of a nearby Black Spiral Dancer's hive. He then announced his intention to destroy the hive, but that it would also go much easier with the Black Fury's help. The Black Furies were understandably astonished by the extent of his information and the boldness of his plan. One Garou against an entire hive. The Black Furies conferred among themselves before deciding to check out his story. When they got there, Whispers in Darkness had already knocked out the Dancer's security, leaving the Worm's forces exposed to attack. But after the Black Furies destroyed the hive, they could not find Whispers in Darkness. He had already moved on to his next mission. Whispers in Darkness would repeat the same pattern in different septs around the world, delivering information to septs about the Worm's minions, infiltrate their strongholds, render them vulnerable to attack, and vanish after they had been destroyed. As more Garou met this mysterious lupus, they began looking into him. The spirits could only say that Whispers in Darkness was a child of thunder, which meant that he was a Shadow Lord. This aroused the attention of the Shadow Lords proper, who sent investigators to unmask this lone wolf. Even his name, Whispers in Darkness, is not truly his, but one the judges of doom have given him, due to his habit of appearing only at night and speaking in hushed whispers. So far, the only intelligence gathered about Whispers in Darkness is that he is a Ragabash, a Lupus, a Master of Disguise, a high-ranking Garou, and very likely a member of the Bringers of Light camp, given some of the gifts he has access to, including the ability to mask himself with worm taint. Even this scant information has been appallingly hard to come by. The spirits themselves will not say what Whispers in Darkness' agenda is, or what his next move might be. So far, Whispers in Darkness has managed to shame a number of Shadow Lords with his selflessness and his success. For their part, the Judges of Doom are perplexed as to what to do about him. While they are pleased that he destroys their enemies left and right, they wonder what would happen if he, or some other Shadow Lord, went rogue and used those skills of infiltration and subversion against the tribe. Whatever the truth of Whispers in Darkness is, the other Shadow Lords know they must handle him with surpassing care. Number 4. Miguel Gutierrez. Born the youngest of 6 children in Guadalupe, Mexico, the young Shadow Lord's theurge, Miguel Gutierrez, spent much of his impoverished childhood in Cumbres de Monterrey, Mexico's largest national park. Now, a Shadow Lord is typically filled with great ambition, even before they change, but Miguel understood and appreciated the world and his place in it. His first change was less violent than most Garou, and he emerged from the experience with almost a kind of enlightenment. He had a talent for channeling the ancestor spirits of the Shadow Lords, which made him both a pawn and a revolutionary within his own sept. But one spirit was particularly insistent on getting Miguel's attention. This long-dead Garou had dark fur, streaked white with age, and every time the Garou was able to seize hold of Miguel, it forced the young theurge to witness a scene in which the Garou ripped a large bat to pieces, over and over again. This terrible vision was also suffused with an overwhelming sense of guilt. The spirit threatened to drive Miguel mad, so he underwent a vision quest to discover who the spirit was and what it wanted. What Miguel discovered surprised him. The spirit's name in life had been Dark Claw of Vengeance, his ancestor, who had slain the last of the Camazotz, the werebats, who were also Gaia's messengers. Miguel's elders were stunned at this. No one had been able to contact the spirit of Dark Claw of Vengeance, but what the theurge followed up with was considered utter madness. Miguel proposed to take a journey into Malpheus itself, the heart of the worm, and seek an audience with Bat, the fallen totem of the Camazotz. The Sept, and even Miguel's own pack, rejected the idea at first. There had to be another way to quiet Dark Claw of Vengeance's restless spirit and make peace with Bat. But Miguel would not be swayed, and through force of will and a little stubbornness, he convinced not only the elders to let him go, but his pack to join him in the almost suicidal mission. Miguel's pack journeyed into Malpheus, the domain of the worm in the Umbra, into the Black Spiral Labyrinth itself, where Bat dwelled since the death of the last Camazotz. Miguel returned from Malpheus, with his powers as a theurge greatly increased, but his pack was beaten down and broken by the experience in the heart of the worm. But the pack returned with Bat, or rather a portion of Bat, redeemed and serving as the pack's totem. Now Miguel's sept is renamed the Sept of the Earth Mother. Those who would not accept Miguel or the Bat were asked to leave the sept. Additionally, Miguel has successfully turned his new gifts and rights against the Sabbat vampires of Mexico and the worm-tainted corporations of the American Southwest. A number of Garou have checked Miguel repeatedly for the taint of the worm, yet he remains pure, a true servant of Gaia. But several new abilities harken back to a time when the worm was an entity of balance rather than corruption. The full significance of Miguel's journey and his newfound totem have yet to be seen. Number 3. Evelyn Constantine. Evelyn Constantine was born in New York City to a wealthy media mogul. She did not experience the first change until well into adulthood, but in the meantime, she demonstrated a streak of ruthlessness and subterfuge that would have put lesser Shadow Lords to shame, even then. She earned an MBA from Harvard Business School, and then allied with, or manipulated her father's business partners into eating out of the palm of her hand. Then she arranged events so that her brothers would lose face with their father, leaving her as the sole heir to his business empire. Now Evelyn was bad enough as a human, but when she became a Shadow Lord, it was like giving a machine gun to a shark. She was the archetypal Lord of the Summit, obsessed with acquiring power, keeping power, and crushing anyone foolish enough to stand between her and the power she craved. One who made the mistake of getting in her way was a vampire, whose name is not worth mentioning. Evelyn had humiliated this nameless vampire some years before, and the vampire, being a spiteful creature, plotted revenge against Evelyn in the form of destroying everything and everyone around her, beginning with Evelyn's only friend in the world. The vampire manipulated the woman into betraying Evelyn. Evelyn responded by slaying her own friend, then swore bloody vengeance against the vampire in question. But the vampire raised the stakes by calling upon one of the greatest enemies of the Shadow Lord's tribe, a butcher of Garou and kinfolk alike, a fiend of Clan Zamitzi, the Voivode of Voivodes, Lord Vladimir Rustovic. And Rustovic wasted no time in giving Evelyn a taste of his old-world charm. Rustovic murdered her father, as only a Zamitzi can, while his junior partner sabotaged one of Evelyn's most lucrative businesses. At this point, Evelyn knew she was outmatched, but she had no allies, so she turned to the only source of help remaining to her, her tribe. Now, many of Evelyn's Sept mates had no love for her, and would have gladly seen her taken down a peg. But Vladimir Rustovic was no ordinary vampire. The Voivode had spent the better part of the last 1,000 years killing werewolves, and Shadow Lords in particular were his favorite prey. The Voivode had a vendetta against the Shadow Lords for the killing of his vampire brides and the sacking of his castle. For Evelyn, this was a chance to redeem herself in the eyes of her tribe, as well as take revenge for her father. An individual Shadow Lord scheming is a threat, but multiple Shadow Lords working in concert is certain doom for whoever has fallen afoul of them. And the Shadow Lords of New York called in every favor available, planned and double-checked and plotted and prepared to kill the Butcher Rustovic. Finally, the trap was set. Half a dozen Garou elders died in the fight, but by the dawn, Vladimir Rustovic was slain, and his withered soul sent to final death. As for the vampire who started the whole affair, he's in the basement of one of Evelyn's homes with a stake in his heart. His death will not be a quick one, and Evelyn plans to savor every moment of it. The war with the vampires opened her eyes to many things and changed her priorities. Before, Evelyn had dismissed the fight against the worm as superstitious drivel. Now she has turned her attention to the rest of New York's leeches and how best to thwart their power games. Additionally, she has begun to investigate Pentex while building enough capital to launch a financial war against its subsidiaries. The death of Rustovic has also drawn the attention of Margrave Yuri Konietzko, the aspiring king of the Garou nation, who has made overtures for her to consider investing in several business ventures in Eastern Europe. Evelyn knows that the Margrave is trying to draw her into his orbit and is considering how Konietzko might benefit her most. She is a Shadow Lord after all. Number 2. Nightmaster. Once, Nightmaster was a hero of the Garou and a member of the secret group of Shadow Lords known as the Society of Nidhogg. All Shadow Lords revere their patron, Grandfather Thunder, but the Society of Nidhogg focused its reverence towards the darkness from which the thunder emerges. The Society, in its time, was rumored to worship the umbral realm called the Abyss, made sacrifices to the Abyss and Grandfather Thunder, and even made alliances with the vampires of Clan La Sombra. Nightmaster was noteworthy in the society when he led his pack into the abyss itself to divine its secrets, which would have the power to extinguish the sun itself. One by one, the pack fell prey to madness, their minds overwhelmed by the darkness. Nightmaster put down each in turn until only he was left, with only his will and his soul, alone, laid bare before the primordial darkness. Few Garou know what transpired between whatever malign will rules the abyss and Nightmaster. A pact was made by which Nightmaster became a slave to the abyss, or perhaps became its master. Nightmaster sealed the bargain with his soul, purging him of all weakness and morality. The lesser creatures of the abyss are now his to command, and any who dare enter the lightless realm will eventually contend with this rogue Shadow Lord. Number 1. Margrave Yuri Konietzko. Yuri Konietzko was destined for greatness from the time he was born in the aftermath of World War II. His father was a German Shadow Lord, greatly respected amongst the Garou of Europe. His mother was kin to the Silverfangs of House Crescent Moon. The elder Konietzko hoped that their union would heal the rift between the Shadow Lords and the Silverfangs. However, this was not meant to be. Germany was divided, and Russia was cut off from much of the world. The elder Konietzko told Yuri to keep the Shadow Lord strong, and to do everything in his power to bring the Garou nation together. The Garou united would tear the heart from the worm, and end war and all of its horrors forever. Yuri took his father's words to heart, and trained relentlessly to be the warrior, politician, and leader his father wanted him to be. When the time came, he even took his father's title of Margrave, and began to fight against the worm in Germany, even before his first change. By the time he was 20, his name was known throughout the Shadow Lord's tribe, but it wasn't until 1991, after the Berlin Wall fell, that the Margrave would reveal his fangs to the rest of the Garou nation. The Shadow Lords in the Margrave Sept cheered the fall of communism, but Yuri Konietzko knew that the Cold War had been a respite, and that the things held at bay by the Iron Curtain were about to come rushing forth. Konietzko moved quickly to seize territory in Romania from the hated vampires, so they could not overrun the Shadow Lords as they had in the past. But the vampires were not Konietzko's only problem. In Yugoslavia, Boris seemed to be pouring out of that war-torn country as fast as refugees were. However, this was part of the Margrave's plan. He recognized that things would have to be bad, just bad enough, for the rest of the Garou nation to pull their heads from their furry asses and accept proper leadership, namely, his. Using prowess in battle, political acumen, and delicate negotiation, Margrave Konietzko managed to forge an alliance with the Black Furies, Red Talons, and Geta Fenris in Eastern and Central Europe. This alliance was formed to stamp out the worm spawn of the East and increase Konietzko's renown. But then, Baba Yaga's shadow curtain fell around Russia, and once again, the Margrave saw an opportunity in the misfortune of his enemies. After the curtain fell, the Silver Fangs of Russia had survived the Iron Hag's wrath, but had been battered in claiming their victory. House Wise Heart was destroyed, and House Crescent Moon was barely standing, thanks to the leadership of Queen Tamara Tavarovich. This left only the House of the Gleaming Eye as Konietzko's main competition for leadership of the Garou nation in continental Europe, but that house has since grown insular and paranoid. Margrave Yuri Konietzko has a great many goals as well as enemies, his foremost goal being to finally destroy the hated vampires of Clan Zamitzi and drive them from the Carpathians. Another was to build a great coalition of Garou in Europe in anticipation of the apocalypse. He has succeeded in bringing the Black Furies, Red Talons, and Geta Fenris over to his side. Recently, he managed to get a highly respected glasswalker in his debt and has made tentative contact with Son of Moonlight, second in command to the Ard-Ri of the Fianna tribe. Margrave Konietzko believes that the time of the Silverfangs as alphas of the Garou nation has passed. Now, in the final days, the Shadow Lords will obtain the prize that the tribe has coveted since before the Impergium, and lead the Garou nation to victory over the Worm, once and for all. And those were the top 10 werewolves of the Shadow Lords. Of the tribes of the Garou, the Shadow Lords are one of my two favorites. The Shadow Lords value subtlety, patience, cunning, and strategy. Like thunder, the Shadow Lords move through darkness, strike without warning, expose the weaknesses of their foes in a bright flash, quickly and without mercy. But the core of being a Shadow Lord is sacrifice. A Shadow Lord will gladly sacrifice himself to Gaia's cause. He will also sacrifice his allies, his reputation, and even his pride, if it serves the interests of the tribe and the Garou. Where the Get of Fenris test their fellow Garou in naked strength and martial prowess, the Shadow Lords test their minds, their wills, and even their honor to separate the worthy from the unworthy and the strong from the weak. The next tribe of Garou in the series are strangers in a strange land, everywhere they go. They are spiritual exiles from their homeland in Egypt, and cursed to wander without peace or rest, thanks to the curse laid upon them by the dark god, Sept. Coming up, the top 10 werewolves of the Silent Striders. Until next time.